Yes. Yes, everyone, welcome to this final session of the Engaging Citizen Science Conference here at Aarhus University. We're very happy to have had all of you, to have still some of you left in the room, and I hope that you will enjoy this last session where we have our second keynote speaker, and we'll have a interactive, engaging panel debate. So we decided not to convene a second panel today on stage. Instead, we envisage you to serve as a kind of general interactive panel for the two keynotes. Heidi Ballard will join Dick Kasperowski here on stage after the second keynote, and this is where you have the chance to submit your questions through our online Mentimeter system that I will introduce after the talk. So you are all invited to ask questions online through your device, your mobile phone or computer, etc., and you can do so following the instructions that I will give you after the talk. But first of all, we'll have our second keynote speaker of the conference, Dick Kasperowski, a professor from University of Gothenburg. Dick is a professor of philosophy, of science and science studies, and he's also studied extensively citizen science. He was the PI for a Swedish research project on citizen science called Arenas for Building Relations in Co-Creation in Citizen, for Co-Creation in Citizen Science, that also developed, where they also developed a national portal, Medborgarforskning, almost there. The Swedish name for it's citizen research, which is now facilitating and accommodating a lot of Swedish citizen science projects. So, without further ado, I'll give the word to you. Welcome, Dick Kasperowski.
Thanks so much. Am I coming? Yeah, really? Yes, I am. Right. What I'm going to say here today is this. Talk about this, but it will be strictly from a Swedish perspective or a Swedish context. And we'll see if there are some generic qualities to it that you can bring home with you. Because some of the issues that we'll bring up are a bit disturbing when it comes to citizen science, I think. They are kind of paradoxes. They are inequalities. There are gender issues. And some of these paradoxes and puzzles concerning the societal effects of citizen science would be these. These are the ones that I have chosen to speak about. It's about democracy and citizen science. It's about infrastructures and how infrastructures can create inequalities in citizen science, of gender, for instance. It's about how trust is performed in some of the really big infrastructures and networks for citizen science in Sweden. And it's about citizen science as a way to handle the limits of the political, to get epistemic representation instead of political representation. I will go into that a little bit later. But the question is, do you know Sweden? I gather from the laughs that you know Sweden. Sweden, you know, that secular, equal, high-trusting, open and scientized society where we used science to create a welfare society since the 1920s and even earlier than so. Science was, you know, like a very important aspect of creating political stability in Sweden over the years. You must not forget that we had the Russian Revolution very close to us, and that was kind of worrying. So it is like a Popperian, for those of you who are familiar with Karl Popper and falsification and open society. Sweden is kind of a Popperian dream come true, or for some people a nightmare come true, of course. But it's very much about creating social stability and mobility. Mobility through knowledge has been very important in Swedish society, meaning that if you are having good, notes in school, you are supported to climb in society. University studies are free and stuff like that. These are things that we have in common with all the Nordic countries, I think. But it's also a technocratic society. It's been criticized for being a very technocratic society. During the late 1960s, for instance, that debate was very, very heightened then. And it's been very much about replacing old unequal relationships, or perceived as unequal relationships of money, of heritage, of birth and stuff like that, instead with science then. And already in 1891, political conservative professors at a conference in Uppsala in Sweden said that scientific method and objectivity has an important role for citizens in a modern society, so that citizens are not seduced by any sudden political, social or religious ideas that is propagated. It has some kind of resonance with what is happening today, hasn't it? Yeah. And what that has amounted to over the years in Sweden, without going into very close detail, is something like that. Sweden is an extreme country. You see Sweden there, close to Denmark and Norway. And this is the World Values Survey. It's been performed yearly. And what Sweden is associated with here is self-expression values like environmental protection, tolerance of foreigners. We are busy deconstructing that. Gender equality, at least we pride ourselves for having it. We will see what you think about it when I'm going a little bit further into my presentation. And it's also participation in economic and political life and in science. And that is now picked up in the current Swedish research bill, which for the first time points out the public participation in research, in the research process, as very important in Sweden. We have had a higher education law in Sweden since 1977, which is quite early, and that states that Swedish researchers at universities in Sweden, they should teach, of course, and they should do research, but they should also interact with society. And that last, third mission, so-called third mission of the Swedish universities, has then been rewritten several times. And it's now into an iteration where you have to inform, collaborate, and make useful your research then. But at the same time, Swedish researchers has constantly, over the years, been constructed as inadequate when it comes to the third mission. And it's supposed to be part of merits for instance, applying for professorships and stuff like that. But it's never really functioned that way, unfortunately. But this is the current Swedish research bill, that the public should be participating or should be encouraged or mobilized or whatever to participate in the research process then. And you see it's a little bit of the standard tale that we have. Interaction between research and the surrounding society has positive effects, contributes to data collection, forms of co-creative influence in the research process, and it goes on. And then it goes on to the last line here, where the government recognized these programs. These are the national research programs currently of some importance in Sweden, and where a lot of funding goes into that. It's climate, sustainable society, housing, access in urban environments, migration, integration, and so on. And what our government wants us to do then is actually to involve the citizens in the research process in these big programs. So far so good, isn't it, with citizen science in Sweden? Yeah. And technical infrastructure for citizen science in Sweden, they have been in place for many years, at least since the 1850s, and even further, into history with Linnaeus and other But more digital technical infrastructures been around since about 2000. Others, also important for citizen science since the 1970s. And they are now currently being developed in relationship to archives and museums also, being targeted for citizen science at the moment. So these infrastructures are important for data, observations that are extensively used for societal decision making by public authorities in Sweden. So citizen data are important in Sweden. They are used for decisions on concerning environmental issues, biodiversity, climate, from the local level of municipalities to the regional level and up to national levels. And they're also contributing this type of data to really, really large, super aggregated levels like the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So, all sounds good, and you now have a little bit of the context of Sweden, and we'll take questions later if there's anything I need to clarify. So let's dive into some of these 3 or 4 issues I started with. And as you will notice in my presentation, they are entangled. So they are difficult to keep apart. And you will see when I repeat myself that, okay, here's a part where he has difficulties to keep them apart, but that's the way it is. They are very entangled and very complex, I think, at least complex for me. So let's dive into one of these aspects then. Protected forest. So in February 2021, and after conducting an inventory, the Swedish organization, environmental organization, Skydda Skogen, Protect the Forest, filed a legal complaint against one of the Swedish public authorities when it comes to biodiversity and actually protection of the forests, namely the Swedish Forest Agency. The Swedish Forest Agency has a little bit of a tricky spot here because they are supposed to guarantee biodiversity and sustainable development when it comes to the forests, but they are also going for the interests of the owners of forest. So what the organization did, they filed a complaint, a legal complaint against the Swedish Forest Agency for not carrying out species inventories of areas targeted for deforestations in the northern part of Sweden. And they were going, of course, for the red-listed species. And it's impossible to avoid red-listed species in Sweden. I mean, almost all areas of our forests do have some red-listed species in them. So, members of Protect the Forest, they performed their own inventory and reported observations to Artportalen, and then Aarhus had something to do with what happened. The Swedish Environmental Court then decided, guided by the Aarhus Convention, in favor of Skydda Skogen. So the forest company couldn't exploit that land. They saved it, so to speak. That's nice, isn't it? Yeah. Not in Sweden, that's not nice. So it started a discussion, of course. Is this a new legal order in Sweden now? Using law and international conventions to exclude the role of Swedish public authorities, those Swedish public authorities that we have such a high trust in Sweden. Sweden is the country in the world that has the highest trust in science and public authorities. It's up into the 70s, percentages of the 70s, even during and after Corona. And in Sweden, an expert, a scientific expert, for instance, our chief for handling the Corona issue, could express uncertainty and being more trusted for expressing uncertainty about how things would go. So that's a kind of a very special Swedish thing. So the discussion started then now. Was this a new form of legal order when Skydda Skogen had done their own inventory and used that data, funneled it through Artportalen, one of the important structures that are also used by public authorities for reporting data on. So they used that, funneled it through Artportalen, and the question was now, wait a minute, they are using international conventions to exclude the role of our so well-trusted Swedish public authorities, and even democracy in conflicts about biodiversity. And the argument was that political failures concerning biodiversity and climate, they cannot be laid out on the court as you cannot vote against a legal obligation. We're in Sweden here, you know. So politicians must be held responsible for their failures, and a sustainable environmental policy must be maintained through broad citizen support. If you're not happy with how biodiversity is handled in Sweden, you don't vote for that party next time. So, what does this case imply? Of course, that democratic and citizen science is in a little bit of an uneasy relationship in Sweden, in that high-trusting country of ours. So what is the relationship between some forms of citizen science, activist citizen science, for instance, and democracy? These questions are, there's no clear answer in Sweden yet, and the conflict line is a little bit difficult to discern here. But I guess it will be, as usual in Sweden, left and rights that will bigger about if this is democracy or not. But if you go to the NGOs and to the activist organizations that are performing this, they would say that, but it is a response to political possibilities, because they are not doing their work. Our political representations or our political representatives doesn't represent us anymore. But now we can create data that represent us, and we can funnel that data through the court system, and we can get some change then. Right, that was the first problem. Is it democratic or undemocratic? The second has to do with with the infrastructures that are in place for citizen observations in Sweden. And this, I'm just talking about biodiversity here. One of these is Artportalen, the one that was used by Skydda Skogen, Protected Forest, the Swedish species observation system. It's one of the largest in the world. It started out as something for birders and developed over time. So since during 2006, 2007, it is now used by a lot of authorities in Sweden for societal decision making, from the lowest municipal level up to the highest national level, and also internationally. And Artportalen is a kind of report system where anybody can report. Anywhere where you are, you can report the sighting of a bird or a mushroom or a vertebrate of some sort or anything. I think the species groups are 11 at the moment. Swedish fågeltaxering, or the Swedish bird taxation, has been around since the 1970s. And that's another type of citizen science project in Sweden. It's very gridded. You enlist to be a reporter at the Swedish bird taxation, and you probably stay there for years, and you have your designated area, and you go out, on very exact time spots to create these large data sets over time. And they are deemed to be more scientific than Artportalen, which is voluntarily, Artportalen is also concerned more with animals' behavior, while the Swedish fågeltaxering is concerned with numbers and statistics then. So these infrastructures are in place for citizen observations in Sweden. And just a short detour here before I go into the inequalities of these infrastructures. So infrastructures for citizen science are now heavily being developed in the GLAM sector. It's not glam rock, but it's that will be interesting. But it's galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, of course. And it's very much about the transcription and the use of AI to make these libraries, collections, or these large archives accessible for the public and for research, of course. And in fact, the Royal Library has been assigned the task by the Swedish government to survey public participation in Sweden and create a report about it somewhere in a year or so. And the picture there is the former Minister of Research, a little bit blurred, but she's not minister anymore, we have a new one. But anyway, there she was. So, infrastructure inequalities in Artportalen. Together with Marie Jönsson and other researchers at the Swedish Agricultural University, we decided to check the metadata or investigate the metadata of reporters at Artportalen since 2000 up until now. So we have 23 years of data, and you should remember that there are about 80, approaching 90 million observations in Artportalen. So it's a lot of data. And this is an image of a couple of species, birds, invertebrates, lichens, vascular plants and stuff, and you have all organisms there. And I hope you can see the female and the male. The female is the blue, the female is the blue, yes, and the male is the turquoise then. And this is the estimated yearly number of individuals identifying as male, female or male reporters for each species group then. So you can see there's an inequality gap over all around here between females and males. And how did we get this data? How was it possible for us? Yes, to have an account at Artportalen, you have to give a valid address, a mail address, maybe a phone number, your real name, and you also have to tick, you don't have to tick the box, but you're given the opportunity to tick the box of female, male, or other. Surprisingly, I think over 95% tick that box. So we have the data. So this is individuals identifying as female or male reports for each species group. And we did a little bit other stuff. This is the estimated yearly number of species reported by individuals identifying as female or male. Boys, they like their birds, don't they? Yeah. Fungi seem to be more equal, but you can see there is also an inequality gap there. And then we looked also on the estimated yearly average species list length, how long the list of reports are per field visit by individuals identifying as female or male reporters. And you see it's the same tendency, of course. And you also see something interesting here is that observations go down over time. You make less observations over time, and that is something that has to do with the culture of Artportalen and the epistemic culture of it. I will go into that in just a bit, just showing you this one then. This is the estimated yearly number days spent in the field by individuals identifying as female and male. So boys are traveling around much more than females, or at least identifying as male and females then. So how can we explain this? Of course, now I'm out a little bit on a limb here, because this is research in progress then. Well, we can think of it as a culture of participation then in Artportalen. It's very competitive. It's very competitive, as it has its legacy in the birding community, where the central organizing value in the epistemic culture in this type of citizen science is to see the rare, to see the unusual. That is what creates value in this culture, and also with a nice photograph and stuff like that. And you make less observations over time because you want to maximize your status in that culture, which is going for the rare, going for the unexpected then. So the male gaze kind of dominates this then. What we don't know, and what will be important for us to know for the future, is if activist citizen science also feature these kind of... We don't think so. We think it's more equal in activist citizen science that are using Artportalen. But that is kind of taken away in all these, big data exercises then. So, I don't know if you can read Swedish, but it's a fun thing there. It says, I don't know so much about birds, but I do know the man in this image. So, I talked a little bit about the difference between Artportalen and the Swedish bird taxation as two different types of citizen science. or different type of infrastructures, an organization of citizen science then. And there are epistemic differences between collecting observations in different infrastructures that are recognized by certain actors and played upon by certain actors in Sweden. Artportalen and Swedish fågeltaxering, Swedish bird taxation, are associated with several temporal and spatial uncertainties about when observations are made and how they are done in the legal context that reach the Swedish environmental courts and public authorities. And I have to read this, I read it out for you. This is a quote from one of the legal, from one of the cases that reached one of the environmental courts in the northern part of Sweden. And it says like this: data in Artdatabanken, which is Artportalen's database, which is the basis for the Swedish Forest Agency's decisions that the species would decrease, and this is the lovely bird there. It's a Siberian jay. Would decrease can be questions as they differ from the Swedish bird survey data. The Siberian jay is not threatened and has a positive trend. A possible explanation for the claims in Artdatabanken may be that the species has a natural fluctuations between the years. And if an inventory is made in a certain year and reported to Artportalen, then the wrong conclusion can be drawn. So what we see in Sweden now is that different citizen data are pitted against each other in cases of court, which has not happened extensively or maybe not at all before. So when we talk about these inequalities that are being produced in these big infrastructures, we also have to include this, the super aggregated level. What is made invisible and what is made visible in these large amounts, large data practices? Power tensions seem to be absorbed and made invisible in these data practices. So when you see these, impressive images of biodiversity, what is it that you see? Is it the male gaze of the world once again? That's a question we have to ask ourselves, I think. What are we producing and what are we not producing with these types of data? So, infrastructures, genders, inequality, and bias, maybe. So, but who cares? Data is data. Isn't this important? Bird migration is a very good surrogate measurement for climate change. Yes, but there are other species also that could be even more important. It is important to think about this because certain species and people move in greater numbers in this big data. We are creating a little bit of epistemic monocultures. These certain people that do certain types of observations that are more scientific than others or more prevalent than others. So what is created beyond data on biodiversity? Are citizen projects creating inequalities or are they mirroring societal structures? And you should remember now that this is taking place in Sweden, the most equal country in the world. So what is happening here? Is it the citizen science infrastructures that does it, or is it mirroring something that we haven't seen before, but that citizen science make visible for us? I'm now going to trust, which was the other one. One of the I had 4. I'm soon reaching the limit here for my presentation. This is a quote from a civil servant at the Swedish Forest Agency. And it says this: for example, if someone has just recently registered an account on Artportalen and reports doubtful observations to stop logging, there's a couple of mandatory things that you have to report in the report protocol of Artportalen, where you were, time, place, stuff like that. And if some of these things are dodgy or missing, then, says this civil servant, doubtful observations to stop logging, for instance, this must be investigated. It's important to be objective. If you see a badly tagged observation and that person comes up several times, you become suspicious. So The use of Artportalen by civil servants in regional public authorities in Sweden then is a tricky one, because an observation is not an observation. It has no essentialism to it. It has to be performed to be certain. And it be performed in a very close and tight networks, because every species you saw on the inequality kind of images I had has their evaluation committees. And some of these are very small, and of course the largest one is on birds. It's about 250 people. The other ones are very small. Fungi, for instance, 5 or 6 people or something like that. And even though this is one of the largest systems in the world, it's a very complex infrastructure. There's a lot of digital applications that are used by authorities in Sweden. Trust in observations is a product in a very small network of trusted observers locally. So you see here, there's another quote here by a civil servant from the regional county boards saying, if we were to follow the species protection ordinance by the letter, we would have to close Sweden down. The species to be protected are clearly listed in the Endangered Species Protection Ordinance, but how should this be done? Many rejects then of request for exploitation of land and can mean changes in the law. Law and observation have a certain discrepancy. Artportalen is a reporting tool. The law is something different. So it has to be performed to meet the legal space that make it possible for environmental action. And that bridge between, that the discrepancy between the law and Artportalen, data in Artportalen, then is something that is performed by the trust in that observation is performed by a very few core set of people. So in spite of mass mobilization and abundance of data, to meet these observations, meet the legal space that makes them actionable for decision making by civil servants, trust formed over time in personal interactions is necessary in Artportalen. For instance, when a civil servant is sitting by his desk and finding a red-listed observation in his screening tool, he usually takes contact with the person who has done that observation, if it's a big issue of exploitation of land. And of course he can do that because you have all these data in the protocol to be able to have an account in Artportalen. You have to be approachable. You have to be. So he approaches that person and probably interviews him, and maybe he knows him already. So that's how trust is created. It's very concentrated in a core set of actors and depends on interpersonal relations. And it's formed over time. So the citizen activist is often envisioned by these civil servants as an occasional visitor that doesn't really know the culture of Artportalen. So trust then, the quality of data is not just something that happens by itself. It's performed into high quality. And civil servants are instrumental in this in Sweden. And when they do express distrust, it is actually in the context of environmental activism. So there's a kind of, I don't like the concept, but I put it there anyway. It's a kind of a deep state of citizen science in Sweden. Okay, the last one I had was about political and epistemic representation. So epistemic representation, that's a concept to understand how citizens are represented by knowledge. Knowledge, scientific knowledge that really is about me. Political representation is about how citizens are represented by political ideas, values, and political parties. And my take on this is that representation, I'm from theory of science, of course, so I have to have that take on it, that representations in science, they are not simply mirroring external physical realities. Observations are performed, for instance, as I had an example here, in a rather small trusted networks to become true. And representation in politics and policy are not simply mirroring reality. So there's no popular will out there for political parties to tap into. We know that political interests are performed by political actors, by political parties then. So there's uncertainty in both these aspects of citizenship or citizenry in Sweden, and as I believe in many other places then. So political and epistemic representation and citizen science as activism. In Sweden, it's very much now expressed by organizations and by youth organization, a discontent with political representation in the context of biodiversity and climate. You all know Greta, of course. It's too slow. It's too slow. We won't be able to address the issues in the time that we have at our disposal before, the big hammer sets in. And these organizations are now seeking epistemic representation through, observations on red lists, channeling them through the large infrastructures that we have in place already. And courtrooms becomes a means to societal change for these organizations then. So epistemic representation is currently, discussed in Sweden. If it is undemocratic, and the lines of conflict are a little bit uncertain yet, but existence of land and water, biodiversity, might be assembled in ways that some actors may view as very undemocratic, others as necessary, because our representative politicians can't live up to the demands we have on them. And it doesn't matter which party that is in power. So for others, relying on the high trust in science, political and societal institutions that for decades have set Sweden apart from many other countries are, coming apart a bit. So I have a kind of a summary. So what is new? Well, in sheer numbers and scale, citizen science represents, of course, a change with traditional notions of scientific knowledge production. But on the other hand, this change is also clearly a continuation of long-standing ideas and ideals regarding collectivism and distribution of labor in science. Science has always been a distributed activity. You need that. You need that for that type of collective intelligence to make scientific progress. No one knows everything. And in the extreme cases, for instance, in high-energy physics, you have 1,500 authors to a paper. It's super distributed. And many things are now delegated to technologies. Technologies, digital technologies, they have bugs in them. So it's sometimes very difficult to understand if an anomaly or if an unexpected result is something that is, produced by the system, or if it actually has falsified the hypothesis or not. So it is a very old tradition to distribute. What is new now is that we distribute it very heavily outside science to all those citizens, of course, which then creates for many problems, and for many it creates also opportunities. But already science has never been democratic. Science is not a democratic endeavor. And that has been taken up, time and time after in the history of science. In '63, for instance, I just took some examples. Maybe they are well known. At least Thomas Kuhn, I think, is well known. But Derek Price, he said that science is undemocracy. That's the driving force behind it. It generates imbalances and inequalities. And Thomas Kuhn said that the perspective of science has shifted from a process of knowledge accumulation, simple knowledge accumulation, to understanding the practices of contingent negotiations of truth, reality, and facts. So science has its politics, as has citizen science. And there are many ways of knowledge production and various forms of expertise we need to recognize in this. So political and scientific representations have to negotiate on constituting decisions whom they consider as speakers and which politics they follow. When we talk about epistemic representation, who are represented by this knowledge then? So scientific governance, at least in Sweden, in which the citizen science now is often imagined, is often associated with the mitigation of inequalities, democracy, inclusion, empowerment, and social change. They're all the positive things we associate with citizen science. And it, of course, can be so. But it is not by necessity it becomes like this then. So inequalities exist in citizen science, at least in Sweden, the most equal country in the world. So if it exists there, maybe it exists somewhere else too, So large citizen science projects display that the majority of participants are highly educated, they are upper middle class, they are middle-aged, they are older, and they are white, and we can go on with a little bit more on that. And gender composition among participants in citizen science, that's a little bit more mixed, but some projects, like the birding projects in Artportalen, show a very strong bias of participants identifying as males then. So, inequalities in science and citizen science can of course be considered as kind of fair, because this proportionate rewards ought to incentivize groundbreaking science. We need to have this kind of competition in science that creates inequalities and stuff. And science products are supposed to be independent then of social factors such as class, race, ethnicity, gender, and nationality, and what we have. They are therefore for everyone and for democratic. But I think such a view on science would not be to advantage for us when we talk about the citizen science and its role in society. So, what makes engagements in citizen science a necessary issue? Because citizen science moves issues of democracy, infrastructure, trust and representation around in new ways. Issues come in new clothes and disguises, and citizen science makes them visible. So, what do we mean when we talk about engagement? Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much, Dick, for a nice and inspiring keynote.
Was it inspiring?
Let's see. We can ask everyone now. So what we'll do, we'll just have a slight rearrangement of computers, or rather I will need to plug in mine.
Do you want me to go down or stand there? No, go down.
No, I want you to stay up here actually, and also I will ask Heidi to come up here, please. So let's see. Yes.
Sweden is not
okay,
so,
and
not so nice
I think
country, huh?
actually if I can put you a little bit out here so we can see you better. Because what we envisaged to do and what we'll try to do is we'll sort of squeeze the last energy out of you and invite you to participate in this interactive and hopefully engaging panel debate. So we have made this Mentimeter. You can see it here on the screen, and you probably know the drill. You can access it using your phone or computer, and you can go to menti.com and enter this code 62 89 83 82, and then you will have access to this open-ended questionnaire where you can post your questions and comments for Dick, but also for Heidi, our second keynote. And when I introduced this format to you, you said it was a little frightening.
He said frightening.
I said frightening, yeah.
I said
we have to see, please no frightening comments here at the end, but we'll invite your questions and comments, and they will be appearing on the screen as we go along. But for the first question, actually, I would like to follow up what you said about engagement, Dick, because that's the exact question that I had prepared, this question about engagement, because we called it engaging citizen science, and I think we anticipated engagement not only from the people who participated and from you, but also talking about how citizen science engages others and is a tool for engagement, different kinds of participants, volunteers, youth, communities. Those were the groups that you talked specifically about, Heidi. But then I think the question, or there are some sort of fundamental questions that remains regarding who is it that we need to engage, and in what ways are we engaging in citizen science, and as you said, what does engagement really mean? So I'm wondering if you could pick up on that topic of engagement in a first comment, perhaps. Dick, would you like to start?
Well, because I kind of talked about it a lot in my talk, but I was going to say you sort of left that, big question at the end of your talk. Did you have an answer for the way you were talking about democracy and the way citizen science highlights inequalities in society? Then you said, and so what does engagement mean? I wondered if you wanted to follow.
Well, of course, I'm in favor of citizen science. I wouldn't stand here otherwise. But when I talk to you just now, engagement for me is also to make. Okay, we collect all that data. We do all these things that citizen science are supposed to do. But when we do this, other things become visible also. Not the visibility of a rare species is important, or the visibility of invasive species is important, but the visibility of who citizen science represents, who that knowledge represents. If there are only 500 people in Sweden that are in charge of the quality of observations in Artportalen, and that data is used for decision making that affects the whole population in Sweden. That is a type of engagement that bothers me a bit.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I never really thought of that, of citizen science being used as a way to represent a population, right? I mean, like it becomes, if it's being used like that for decision making, we know it doesn't represent in any given country, right? The people that are participating in citizen science definitely don't represent the population well. We know it's white, male, middle class, middle-aged, and so that seems, I never really thought of, because that's sort of like the holy grail, is to have governments involve citizen science data generation for environmental issues anyway, right? Like that's like what I understood the EXA and the European Commission connections are supposed to be heading towards, right? And so to think that it was being generated by, honestly, the same people that have always been in charge for a very long time, right? That's kind of the opposite of what we want.
Yeah, but do we want citizen science to be like science? It's a question for you. Do you want citizen science to be like normal science, the Kuhnian normal science thing, when we all agree upon how we should do things and stuff and that? Because if we do want that, we are also tapping in all the inequalities that normal science has created over the years, and that we hope citizen science should change. Mm-hmm. So we need to be really radical when we think about the methodologies of citizen science, not to recreate structures of inequality. That's really no pressure, but that's really a task, I think. But the work you do with young people would probably be very important to socialize them into this, whatever, new paradigm of or using the Kuhnian.
New old, right? Yeah.
Here's a comment that kind of turns a little bit around. It says, does the urgent need for engagement from citizens means that democracy has failed?
Yeah.
Wow.
Right?
That's a heavy one. I don't think democracy. Oh well, maybe
No,
you.
you do this one.
I don't think. I sincerely hope that democracy has not failed. I hope you agree. But democracy is not just politicians. Democracy is something bigger than that. But I do think that there is a valid discontent with what politicians have amounted to when it comes to climate change and biodiversity. So I'm in support for citizen activism, even though it's okay. I can confess to you. Don't let this leave the room. But I can accept what are called undemocratic activist citizen science. But I sincerely hope that democracy is not, I will not condone a epistemic dictatorship, if you know what I mean. I will not condone that.
No.
No. And by the way, when Popper talked about open society, he said that specifically, that science does not thrive in a very authoritarian state. It needs a social liberal democracy and an open free speech to be able to thrive. And we can't be really against that, I hope.
No, right.
Yeah. So we can change the tone a little bit, and because there was a couple of questions that relates to your personal engagement with citizen science. I noticed the first one here is about could you both tell us a little bit about how you realized that citizen science was the thing
That's a
for
great
you?
question.
And there's a related one here at the right. What was your favorite experience related to citizen science research?
Is that for you?
It's
I
for
hope
both of us, I think.
Our favorite.
Yeah, first of all, when did you realize that citizen science was the thing for you? And what's your favorite experience related to?
I'd be interested to know how you kind of decided, because you're coming from this whole area over there, and when did you decide citizen science was something you wanted to look into?
Okay, I can tell you. I was intrigued by citizen science, or it wasn't really citizen science at the moment. It was just the epistemic of inclusion, if I, clad it in some fancy words.
I was going to say, if you could say those in
I will say it.
How would you say it?
Very simply put, what do I have to know to be part of it? What do I have to know to be included? That was what I was intrigued about, and that was coming from a circumstances that were our family didn't have a strong legacy in academia and science and research. So when I came to university, I was always struck by that. What does it take to be part of this? So that is something that is very out there in citizen science. We have this protocol of participation. Some very, very large citizen science projects have a very low cognitive threshold to be part. You don't have to know anything about galaxies to classify them. Others have a very high cognitive threshold. You need to know a lot about programming, for instance, to do stuff. And the birding community, knowledge and the epistemic culture of that is different from other cultures then. But it was that. What does it take to be part?
What does it take to be part? For me, I think it was sort of during my dissertation research, which I've told you about, right? During the forest work with harvesters. And I think it was, I really thought I was going to be just a straight up ecologist, forest ecologist, and then when I got up there and realized that there were all these social, economic, political, cultural things going on around the thing that I thought was just ecological, and told that the only people that could really help me answer the question or could answer my questions at all were not scientists at all, not even people that were considered a part of the regular society because they were these, marginalized forest workers, and they were the ones who were totally ready to help me in terms and had so much knowledge and experience. And then I went back to my professor, and they said, and one of my committee members said, "Oh, so it turns out that's a whole field. It's called participatory action research, and there's all these methods for that, and there's a whole area of people doing that in developing countries and in public health and all this stuff." That's when I was like, oh, so you're saying I could like do my dissertation this way, and it still counts as a dissertation, right? So that's kind of the thing that I think I realized, like, oh, this is the like authentic, ethical, respectful way that I should be doing this research, and actually it's still cool with the academy. So that was probably when I realized it. And then it was only later, right, years later, where people said, "Oh, that's also sounds like citizen science," and I was like, "Yes, it does. Let's all talk about it together." So.
And your favorite experience?
Do you have a favorite experience?
My favorite experience, that would be a Zooniverse experience then in Galaxy Zoo, when a Dutch school teacher saw something that didn't fit the protocol for classifying galaxies, took that to the discussion forum and asked, "What is this?" And one of the researchers responded, "I don't know, I have to check that out." And then she was second name on a scientific publication, and the phenomena is called Hanny's Forwap, and no one really knows what it is. When an astrophysicist doesn't know what it is, it's usually a rest of a black hole or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. That I thought was an interesting, all right, so what is a scientific discovery now? You can do a scientific discovery without knowing anything about galaxies if the participatory protocol is good enough, or not good enough then, because this didn't fit in.
Right.
It was an anomaly. And we know anomalies, that is what we sometimes want, because that's what propels science forwards, the unexpected result.
Yeah, that's cool.
That was, I think.
And yours?
The
Heidi?
one that comes to mind was more recently, was working with this the dam removal project, where we're working with the conservation scientists, a lot of forest scientists, and then the volunteer watershed monitoring group in Montana, in Missoula, Montana. And it was basically like getting back to being in the field. I don't know about you all, but I spend too much time in front of my computer in my house or in my office. And so to be like, thigh deep in really pretty cold water with a whole bunch of volunteers who were all really excited and were trying to identify little macroinvertebrates, and just being out there in the water and talking with them about the protocol and why they see the protocol needing to be changed. And I suggest ways that they can change, ways that they can have the groups talk to each other so that they're actually comparing their data right in the field instead of waiting till later. And they were like, "Oh, that's," being told I'm giving a good idea is always nice. And so I remember that I was like, "Oh, this is what I wish I was doing every day." So that's and to have them change their protocols because of the realizations they made in that moment, to have a better protocol, and everybody was learning science together in that moment. So that was pretty that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, thank you. Here's a comment for you, Dick. I think you should have it. It's thoroughly enjoyed the well thought out keynote by Dr. Kasperowski. No question, just compliments for this very big picture on the history and implications, consequences of CS in democracy. So that's a comment for you that you can take home.
Good job.
But actually, I digged out two questions I think that relates to the starting theme of today, namely the communities, and I think that they're addressed for both of you. So there's a comment here: how do you engage, mobilize, and support communities you do not belong to, without being patronizing, colonial, disconnected, etc.? And a related one also for both of you: what is the role of trust building with communities in citizen science?
Can you show the other one again?
Oops, yes. Oh yeah, it has a smart function.
Oh, you can. do
So
that.
this is the engage, mobilize, and support communities you do not belong to without being patronizing, colonial, disconnected, etc.
And also, it does say at all, and I wonder if that means all. Could that mean all?
At all, yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of the panel this morning have a lot of, the folks that were up here this morning have a lot to say about how you do the work in developing context without being colonial, right? It sort of could perpetuate all the things that are wrong with, colonial sort of attitudes and approaches. So I just thought maybe they might have something they want to say too, or if other folks have thoughts about that as well. But also, Dick, you sounded like you had a response.
I hope you wouldn't say that, because this is a...
You do want me to say that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
No. I think this is very an extremely difficult issue, of course. But community you do not belong to, what would that mean? It mean that you would be a designated outsiders coming there with something. Looky here, what I got, some nice glass pearls for you. Can you do this for me?
Right.
But think about the modus operandi of science. What is the modus operandi of science? It is to separate. It is to explore differences. It is a lot of these things that we are actually associated with separating things. And I'm an anthropologist by training, and that is something that structural anthropology have known for many years. That all human cultures do that. They separate, they discern. I mean, cultural relativism is just a method. Most cultures are not relativistic towards their closest neighbors, for instance. That's why Indian Native Americans call them Eskimos, which means eater of rotten meat, not Inuits, which means human being. So there is something very fundamentally human about patronizing, actually. On the other hand, science has shown that all people are to 99.9 or something 7 or something like that alike genetically.
Right.
So, but when it goes to the modus operandi, it's about separating and exploring differences and stuff like that. I'm going on a long bike tour here just to say that I don't know. I'm sorry.
I have a thought, and that is I realize that this speaks to a lot of what I do with my participatory action research class, because what it is a group of graduate students from lots of different disciplines who are all trying to figure out whether and how they could do participatory research with the community that they're interested in working with, right? And this is literally the question I'm glad I wrote it down because you're scrolling. No, that's okay. That this is literally the question that you wrestle with, right? If you're trying to, maybe this is ethically, morally, intellectually, the way you want to do your research, right? Forever, or at least a little bit. But you can do damage as a researcher going into a community, right? You can perpetuate all the power structure problems that are, that have been there forever, coming in as a white person or coming in as a researcher from a big university, all these things, as an outsider, any community you don't belong to. So usually it's about humility. There's the concept of cultural humility, right? Where you don't go in thinking that you're ever going to be an insider if it's a community, right? You just don't think shouldn't be the goal. You go in with humility and respect and listen and don't presume and don't make assumptions, right? Those I think are the ways that over and over again we see it's a way to try to undo a little bit of what's been, the approaches that have come before with traditional research and not be, I mean, also you're going to make mistakes. That's what we always find, is that, like I try to say, it's not, you're going to screw up at some point and make some mistakes about this. But if you, again, go in with humility and try to listen and be respectful, and someone talked about it this morning about just back out. Oh, was it during the youth session? Just back out and try to fix what you've done. So, I mean, that's at the same time bringing your resources to bear, the whole engage, mobilize, and support part of that question, right? I mean, we have incredible resources. Even when I thought I was a really poor, underprivileged graduate student when I was doing my work, right? But the fact is I was incredibly privileged and had tons of resources and status. I could give the guys I was working with status just by walking into the Forest Service office, right? And saying, this is my research team for today. So to kind of think about where you do have that sort of power and privilege that you can use to support and uplift. That's the other thing that I have learned through the last a couple of years is, as a white woman, I need to partner with, scholars of color and lift up what they're saying, what they're trying to do, and partner with communities of color and other communities that I'm not a part of, and have them help to amplify voices rather than talk for them or speak for somebody. So that's what I have to say about that.
Just one thing that yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then another thing. No, never.
No, but just to summarize what you said.
Oh, please.
Yeah. You have to understand cultures on their own conditions. Otherwise, that would be such a gross mistake to come with ethnocentrism and try this is good for you. So, and that is very difficult. I'm an anthropologist, and it usually takes 2 years of field work in a culture to try to approach that state. And then you are afraid of instead going native, which is not good either. So, yeah, it's a difficult, really.
Did anybody else want to add anything to that whole? Yes, and then there was also someone over here too.
Yes, we may be able. I can see Gitte is running. She's running for microphone, and not to escape the room.
I think I did that. Sorry. What? No.
Thanks. I just wanted to add a comment to this because I understand where the question is coming from, but I think we need to be careful with the words, because if I'm engaging, mobilizing, and supporting a community, I'm not colonial, I'm not disconnected. So sometimes we shouldn't just be too stereotypical. If I'm a white man from the global north, it doesn't mean that everything I do is disconnected or colonial. I think that we can, as Dick was saying, we can learn about communities to which we don't belong, and we can still support, mobilize, and engage. So I think this is the beauty of citizen science, that we have methodology precisely that we have been working on for years now that can do that in different contexts. So, yeah.
Yes, and there was another one over here.
Do you want to raise? Yeah.
I'll be very short. Reciprocity.
Mm-hmm. That's the answer, or that's the question? Both, right?
That was the answer.
Yeah, I think that was the answer. Reciprocity is the one we talked about. There's also someone behind you, just so you know. Sorry. We were talking about that to some point today. That whole idea of reciprocity is huge. Is giving back, and we talked about compensation versus payment. Where's James, right? That's a big piece of this. Compensation is sometimes part of reciprocity too. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I just wanted to ask that, say that I think it's important that we also share the mistakes that we make, because we all do make mistakes when we do field work. So just as well as we are sharing our successes, we can make sure that we don't necessarily need to make the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. There's a related comment here, which I think is, how do we get more diverse people actively doing citizen science then? We have news that our lake water quality work is not only getting covered in a local free paper tomorrow, but the jazz festival people are going to get involved in sampling.
And so is the question about that, I mean, that sounds kind of like a success.
Yes.
In that
the jazz festival
people that normally might not be getting involved are getting involved. Is that true? Anonymous person posting that? Who might be in the room?
But couldn't we pose the question differently? I mean, how can we get more diverse people active doing citizen science? But how can we, accommodate them? It's not
That's
about
right.
it's not about we getting them.
That's right.
It's about them getting us.
Well, it's about us getting them in and understanding them, maybe, right? I mean,
Right, okay.
we talk about, a lot of times we say it's not about inviting people to my party. It's about me going to where people are and what they need and finding out what people need and seeing if that's something I can offer, right?
Yeah.
With a lot of times with citizen science, we talk about recruitment and retention, right? And how do I recruit people to my project and things like that? And it's usually a good idea to start with hearing what people need in order to create the project, if you can. Yeah.
How can they recruit you?
Right. How can I get recruited to help somebody? Yeah. It's a good point.
There was a question here about future, I think so, and I think that was also one of the things that I had prepared
That is
to talk about. I think it's fitting here for the end of the conference and talk a little bit about ahead and where all these new ideas and thoughts and
where do we want to be in 10 years?
Where would we in 10 years? And what's the ultimate goal is the question here for citizen science. What should we all aim it towards?
Right.
In 10 years, I will be retired. So it's up to you.
Exactly. But that's the question. Do you want everybody to be back in this room having the same conversations again and the same kinds of things that we're talking about, or do we want to have moved forward to something else?
But what is the ultimate goal for citizen science? I think it's sometimes difficult to have goals. Because when you reach them, you just get empty, I reached the goal. It's better to think maybe in terms of processes. What's the ultimate processes or something like that?
Well,
but for me, it's the potential for citizen science to change science to something better. Because as I hope to show a little bit in my keynote, is that they make so clearly visible stuff in science that we need to change, and we should aim towards them, less inequality and all that stuff. Then, of course, but that is so overwhelming a task to. I mean, paradigm shifts, they occur very seldom, and they really need. But I think. The societal challenges of today, climate change, biodiversity, and they can't be solved by professional scientists alone. They need, citizen science.
Yeah, we talk about at the center, we sort of tried to come up with that sort of what's the goal, what's the manifesto, and it's that that sort of involving people who aren't professional scientists in the research at our university is in science, like basically that is every everybody gets trained in methods for involving members of the public in their research if they want to, and that it's just a part of how science gets done for the fields and for the questions that make sense, right? That's what that's the vision that we hope for, and also that everyone feels like they can use the scientific process, science methods, however you want to see it, and to answer questions and solve problems in their daily lives. Like that every kid that we work with, every student, every undergraduate, every child gets to be a part of, feels like they can use it as a tool to do to make the change they want to see, whether they're in an underserved community, a marginalized community, or a privileged one. But does anyone else have an answer to that? Have
Yes,
you guys
please
got
go
a
ahead
vision
if
of
you-
that idea? Like, what do you see? What's the goal? What should we be going for? With participatory action research for the really community-based work, we sort of talk about the goal is to work yourself out of a job, to make it so that you've built capacity in that community to do research for themselves so that you don't even need to be there anymore, right? Which always sort of was a little scary, but but there's always going to be the need for the professional researcher and scientist, and so that's not for all citizen science.
But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
We have a comment question over here, and then over to you.
Yes, thanks. Maybe in relation to vision for the future, I was actually thinking that maybe as communities in citizen science were discussed this morning, I was thinking exposing communities that so far haven't been exposed so much to citizen science in terms of professionals, like for example, judges. We are talking about citizen science in courts, but in this conference, I think there's no representative of the court sector, or lawyers. I mean, I'm a lawyer, but I haven't met another one. So in a sense, I think like biologists, education scientists are greatly involved, and they are leading. But we still need to convince like old-style lawyers or judges that this can be an asset for them, a method. And I think until we don't really enter in this field, we may really be in a bubble where we are super sure about how it's convincing for a court, but then this may happen in Sweden or in the US, where it is way more culture of litigation based also on citizen science. But in many European countries, this is like utopian. So I hope that also this kind of communities would join these spaces in the future, and maybe also, we can open their eyes with our practice.
Right.
So that's just maybe a comment or suggestion.
Oh, that's good. I mean, because I was saying, I hope that this becomes a part of just how science is done. It would be nice if it were also just a part of how policy is done, or legal, the court system is including this kind of information. But I mean, the stuff you raised, that was very interesting to me, about that it was like battling, pitting two different citizen science platforms against each other. That the court did that, right? So that's, I don't even know what to do with that.
But I mean, I don't know about the ultimate goal, but one goal could, of course, be to understand how these inequalities in citizen science then occur, if they occur, and how to mitigate them. Must be important, and if we are aiming for that elusive democratization of science, that we probably would be the ultimate goal then
Right.
for citizen science.
We have another comment from the audience.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to share my vision of the aim we should go forward to, and it's inviting actually citizens to this conference, and not just for the Open Science Day, for demos. Yeah, to find like a common epistemology at some point as well, and not stay as a gated community inside academia.
Yeah, can I ask, though, I think there's some people here, like there's been some EXA conferences that have included citizen scientists as well. Is that true? Yeah. How'd that go? Do you remember?
It's a different discourse.
Right. It's a different conversation. Yeah. Yeah. I think I remember, and this conference had a Citizen Science Festival Day, right? And it's interesting to think about just sort of the kinds of conversations you can have when different kinds of people are in the room. And I think that's a great point, that we would have a different conversation. You know, sometimes academics just talk to each other, and that's useful, but also hearing from other voices too, in addition to that conversation, would probably be really good. Yeah.
Yes, one more, please.
I think Gitta handed this to me reluctantly. Pietro Michelucci, Human Computation Institute. So I love this question because it's a vision question, and we all have visions, right, and opinions. But one way I like to think about this is, you know, that we share kind of the goal of surviving as a species. I think most of us do. And of course, we realize that entails the survival of the biosphere and the planet. And citizen science seems like an opportunity to kind of leverage the information processing of humans and combine those with machines. And over time, maybe we can kind of aggregate all these information processors into an increasingly connected and global system that can do really effective predictive modeling. So why do we care about prediction? I mean, I think a lot of people in the room know that if we can do good prediction and we're trying to seek solutions to problems, we can evaluate those solutions before we go and implement them and mistakenly create new problems. We can sort of model those processes. So I think for, you know, our institute and our goals with regard to citizen science, there's always this reciprocity of what does the individual get out of it, and we certainly respect that, but we also see the broader kind of picture of everyone sort of collectively pitching in, you know, to address some of these really big societal issues that we just can't do alone. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody want to add? Anybody else with the big vision, the big aim?
Hello, I just want to say I'm a citizen and I'm here.
Excellent.
Yes. Just to say we are here, and I don't know if this is a goal, but I have a dream having citizen science in high school on the curriculum at the universities. Yes.
Hear, hear. I think there's another person.
There's another person. Yes, please go ahead.
I think the aim towards should be making academia more accessible for the people not in academia, because the only way we're going to move forward doing research and outreach is actually having people come in and understand what you do. I'm not in academia. I've been trying now for the past 6 years to get to be with you lot, and I'm told all the time no, but I'm part of a different community science project at MIT. For some reason, you guys don't want to talk to us, but we really want to talk to you. And how do we create that collaboration? Because everyone's silent. We don't see you, we don't hear from you, we don't know where you are. There's no magic portal where we can go, hey, I have this really cool project and I think you'd be amazing to do this. We need to figure out a way of finding each other and working with each other and not staying in our own little silos.
Well, that is a good point, because I was just talking to Rosie, who's at Zurich, and asking her about how, because she has, I mean, it sounds like she does have the single entry point to the academia, where people know that's where to go to find a researcher to work with at the university, or for researchers to come to find community groups to work with, or members of the public to work with. And that's like my goal. I mean, I have baby steps towards that at my center, but it seems like that's what the Time for CS, Time for Citizen Science project is looking at, is all the 38 universities or something that are trying to figure out the way to make that connection between community groups and members of the public with academics and researchers. And it's amazing how hard it is. It should not be that hard, but it is.
Thanks very much. We're about to wrap up, so thanks everyone for engaging in this interactive panel debate, as we call it. Is there something you would like to say, final words for?
Big finish? No.
Big finish? No? But
thank you for having me, though. I really appreciate being here.
it's us that thanks you for coming, and thank Dick for coming. Thanks everyone for coming. Please give a hand to our two keynotes. And before you go down, we have a small souvenir from Denmark that you can take back home to Sweden and the US. I hope it fits into your suitcases.
So nice.
Thanks very much. And let's see, we will continue, go right into I hope. Oops, that was the wrong one. How do I get back without revealing too much? Look away. Oh, what's happening? Yes, thank you for taking it off. I need a second. No? Here it is, yes. The poster prizes. So before we wrap up completely, we would like to announce the poster prizes that you have nominated, or the posters you have nominated for Best Poster Awards in our 10 categories. And I feel like that should be some kind of music coming on in the back, but it's not the Oscars, so I will simply get on with it and announce the winners of our poster awards. And as you may remember, we had 10 categories, so there will be 10 winners. In the first category, approaches to co-creation in citizen science. The winner, and we do hope that they're in the audience, otherwise we will track them down and give them their prizes afterwards. But the winners in the first category are Katrine Marie Skovborg Winter and Michael Søgaard Jørgensen. For poster number 5, co-designing inclusive and youth-friendly societies through civil engagement in circular economy activities.
Thank you so much.
The prize is yours. Thank you very much. In our second category, citizen health science, and by the way, thank all of you for making the poster presentation so lively and interesting. I think it was a very nice atmosphere we had in Stagladen during the poster presentation. You could hear the buzz, and you can feel the focus and the attention given to the poster presentations. In the citizen science health science category, and here is a challenge for me trying to pronounce the title of the poster, but we have a international and interdisciplinary team. Daniel Drachman, Austin Carrick, David Weinstein, Jakob Pedersen and Henrik Christensen for poster number 10, Ketotic Hypoglycemia in Down syndrome. And that's you. Yeah. Thank you. Please. Thank you very much. Thank you. Tillykke med det. Yeah, it's going well. It's good that the winners are in the audience. So the third category is citizen science across different research fields and sectors. The winners are a German team led by Lena Finger with Laura Schmidt, Vanessa van der Bøgaard, Katrin Sommer, Max Stedler and Joachim Wirth from the Ruhr University in Bochum for poster number 20, Science of Citizen Science. Please. Number 4 category, citizen science in ecology and the environment. The winners are, and oh, yeah, you can know. Anne-Katrine Aargaard, sorry, that came out. Poster number 25, Find a Lake, with a team for University of Southern Denmark. Sara Egemose, Claudia Carlsen, Christina Greve, Anna Okholm, Line Laursen, Anne-Katrine Aargaard, who you name you saw, and Thomas Korsted. So thank you very much. Oh, congratulations. Sorry. Making technology work for citizen science. The winner is Libuse Hanna Veprek. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly. From LMU Munich. For poster number 30, Assembling Spheres, Aligning Human Computation Systems in Citizen Science. Congratulations. Thank you. I kind of lost track of the number of groups that we are in, but this is the group Empowerment, Participatory Democracy and Inclusiveness in Citizen Science. And the winner is, and I'm proud to say, because it's a winner from our own center here at Aarhus University, it's Mary Elworth from the Center for Science Studies, Aarhus University. For poster number 38, Citizen Science and Data Justice. Thank you, and congratulations. Oops, yeah. I messed it up with the animations, but the winner is, in the category from Science Communication to Engagement in Citizen Science, Joanna Magalhães, Blanca Guache, Roa Arias, and Cristina Luiz from Portugal. No, Spain, sorry, and Portugal, sorry. Congratulations. You earned it. And the poster was Defining Citizen Science Communication Strategies to Engage Citizens, new Sierra Lab. In lessons learned on recruitment and engagement. The winners are, again, we have a German team, Valerie Knapp, Vanessa van der Burgard, Joachim Wirth. They've been here before, some of them, for scaling up engagement, poster presenting insights into the ongoing research accompanying the Europe-wide citizen science project, Plastic Pirates, Go Europe. So, congratulations. Citizen science in education, and again, it's not a local team, but it's a Danish team. We are happy to announce, and it's a poster in Danish. Mette Frentz Harstrup, Cecilie Bjerre, and Claus Petersen from the University of Southern Denmark. Vores historie. Det er godt. Congratulations. Thank you. And public participations, the dual perspectives of participants and project leaders. We have 2 winners, or 1 winner with 2 names on it. It's Mia Berg and Andrea Lorenz from University of Bochum and University of Hamburg. Poster number 62, History as Co-Creation, Public Participation in the Project Social Media History.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Those were the poster prizes. They all deserve it, but thanks everyone for making the poster session such a nice and interesting poster session. If you could turn back to my slides again, please, because I would just like to use the opportunity also to say thank you to some of the people behind the conference and some of the organizations behind the conference. We would, now we're two on stage, yes. We would like to thank Novo Nordisk, who kindly made a generous contribution to the conference and paid for most of the conference. Aalborg University, who funded or gave us the opportunity to have this wonderful audiovisual equipment in the room and also stream the keynotes and today's panel session. We would also like to thank Aarhus University for accommodating and having us here and supporting us in terms of the rooms and the conference center, etc. We should also all give a hand to our very friendly and hardworking student helpers. And they are here, if you could please come up. Yes, please join us here. I think this is fun. Thanks very much to all of you, and I hope that you've also enjoyed and kind of attended or got an impression of citizen science and listened into some of the activities going on here. So thank you very much. I would also like to remind you that we have this opportunity for submitting your longer version of your full-length paper, which is 2,000 words in this case for our proceedings. There's a deadline for 23rd of May, and you can submit it. We'll give you the information. There are informations on the homepage, and we'll supply more information about submitting your paper through the Proceedings of Science webpage, where we have a special section allocated for our conference, and where you can submit the articles, and the whole process will go through their web portal. We have been very happy to have all of you here. We've really enjoyed the conference, and we also hope that you have enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful experience, and we have made so many good and wonderful contributions to the development and ongoing conversation about citizen science. We have to use the next couple of months, I think, to digest everything that we experienced in these 2 very wonderful and nice days. So thanks very much for coming here, and have a nice trip home.
I wasn't going to say anything, so I'm just going to say thank you very much. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you here, finally, after a lot of hard work. But hopefully we'll see you back in Aarhus again someday, now that you know how lovely our city is and the university. Do get in touch with not just us, but anyone who participated here. Let's keep this community growing, and hopefully see a lot of you in October at the AXA conference in Berlin as well. Thank you very much. Have a good trip home.
can we also just say a thank you to our hosts, that this has been a really fabulous conference. Thank you very much. That's all I thought.
Have a lovely trip home. There's no more coffee, so goodbye.